We're recording this on Monday afternoon. Both the Associated Press and USA Today's coaches polls came out. Houston is still number one in both national polls. They actually gained a few points after they only played one game this past week, and that was against South Florida. They were able to pull out a tough win against the Bulls at home, staying ahead of Kansas. Purdue's at 3, Alabama 4th, and UCLA jumped into the top 5 when it comes to both national polls. Obviously, of course, when you look at the NCAA net rankings, the Cougars are still number 1 in that as well. But when we look at the Houston Cougars men's basketball team in particular, kind of take a little broader sense of it, Associated Press coaches poll, they're number 1 there. That's all fine and dandy, but it doesn't really matter because come March, when the committee is choosing seedings, there's only 4 teams that could be a number 1 seed, and it won't matter if you were number 1 in the AP poll for a certain amount of weeks. It comes down to the committee. So, of course, when it comes to Houston, they're in a bit of an interesting position because currently they are undefeated in conference play. They're 5-0 heading into Tuesday night's matchup against Tulane, who they're currently the second best team in the American Athletic Conference. They're the only team besides Houston that does not have more than 1 loss. They're going to be entering that matchup 5-1, and they're coming off a strong win against UCF. But that's where they're in an interesting position because if Tulane beats Houston, there's going to be those national pundits that say, well, hey, look, that proves that Houston's not that strong as a number 1 team and this and that. Look, they lost to a Tulane team, which, again, they're 5-1 heading into this game. In the conference play, they're 12-5 overall. Now, if Houston beats Tulane, they would improve to 6-0. Tulane would have 2 losses. That means every team in the American Athletic Conference would have at least 2 losses besides Houston, which, again, if they beat Tulane, they'll still be undefeated. And then you have the counter argument where, look, Houston, they're kind of like Gonzaga because the American Athletic Conference is not a good basketball conference, similar to like Gonzaga with the West Coast Conference now. I think we both agree that the American Athletic Conference is a much better basketball conference top to bottom than the West Coast Conference. But they're kind of in a lose-lose situation. It doesn't matter what the outcomes of the games are. They're kind of, from a national perspective, you could see an argument being made against them that, hey, they're playing in the American Athletic Conference. Who are they really playing, even though they are 3-1 currently as of January 16th when it comes to games played through January 15th in quad 1 games against those top-level opponents?
Yeah, and I think it'll always be in comparison, or who are the other potential number 1 seeds that you're comparing it to? Will it be from the likes of from Kansas, who is in the Big 12 and the best best conference in college basketball? Will it be from teams like Alabama, who's in the SEC or a conference that's better than the American, of course, and who is a team that beat Houston on their head-to-head matchup? So I think that conversation will always come down in comparison to teams and not only their conference but their resume, in which part of their resume is the strength of their conference. And so, but for Houston, the lack of respect, like we were just mentioning for the women's, I think that goes across the board for the American, for the men's as well. And it's hard to say that Houston must go undefeated to win that number 1 seed, but I kind of feel that way. I think it'd be acceptable maybe for 1 loss in the conference play to potentially be acceptable, but it'd have to come from either Tulane or maybe a Memphis team who has 2 conference losses already. So I don't know how much weight that would hold. But for Houston, I mean, I think you just got to keep stacking up the wins, however they come, whether it's a 2-point win, 3-point win, 15 or 30-point win. You got to take care of business on a day-to-day basis because 9 times out of 10, they aren't going to win that argument if you're comparing resumes from the likes of Kansas, Texas, or Alabama, or potentially even UCLA, where they're in the Pac-12, in which Oregon just beat a ranked Arizona team. So you never know how their conference and how everything's going to play out. And even though Kansas is rolling right now, I still don't see them going undefeated in conference play, in which you don't expect that because they're in the Big 12 and they're in a dogfight pretty much on a night-to-night basis. And so for Houston, you just got to control what you can control. Style points I believe, are taken into account from the committee and stuff like that. But for Houston, you just got to win.
Absolutely, and that's an interesting thing when you think of style points, something that, again, not us speaking from a national lens, going back to a week ago when they played South Florida, that's not a game that's going to get them a lot of style points because, again, looking at it from an outside perspective, it's USF. Really, Houston struggled to play USF, but obviously we watched a game that give credit to South Florida because they came in to the Fertitta Center, which doesn't happen often. They punched Houston in the mouth, and they were right there with them. It took Marcus Sasser, Jamal Shedd, and Tremont Mark, and obviously that's just the top three scorers from that game. But they all had to make plays, and of course defensive plays as well to be able to pull out that win. But a game like South Florida potentially could hurt them when it comes to, like you said, that style points factor from a national perspective.
Yeah, it definitely could. It definitely could. And but like I just said, for Houston, I think the main thing for them, regardless of where they end up in regards to seeding, they just want to get to a point to where they're playing their best basketball. I'm sure that's what Coach Sampson is focused on. I'm sure that's what the players are focused on. And that's what they should be focusing on how they can reach their full potential. But so regardless if they're 2 seed, 3 seed, or 1 seed, I don't think it really matters because if they're playing their best, they're going to expect to play like a 1 seed regardless of the number in front of their seeding. And it really doesn't matter once you get into the tournament, whether you're a 2 seed, 3 seed. I think that's all for media and stuff like that because we've seen like last year, teams who are quote unquote Cinderella team go on long runs. And so it's a one loss tournament, of course, but I think for Houston, they just got to stack up the wins. And for me, I'm thinking about how they can become more consistently offensively as a team. Defensively, they're going to be consistent on a night-to-night basis. And we saw not inconsistencies from individual players, but I'm thinking we're starting to see consistency from offensively from as a team. And I wonder how can they keep that going forward to keep that rolling.
Absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned, the thing that the players and Coach Sampson and his staff are focused on is continuing to improve and hitting their stride once they get into March for the conference tournament. And then, of course, the NCAA tournament. Kelvin Sampson always says he never overreacts to wins or losses. Now, to touch on what you said, and when it comes to being much more consistent, particularly on offense, I think the big piece of the puzzle there will be Jarvis Walker, who the last 2 games he's played in, obviously he missed last Wednesday's game to South Florida due to an illness. He's expected to be back, by the way, for Tuesday's game against Tulane. You're kind of starting to see that consistency from him, which that's a big piece of the puzzle. It's not a coincidence that in those 2 games where Walker has played well, Houston has relatively cruised to a victory.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I think you hit not only, I don't want to say it starts with him, but he's probably that X factor player who you need to be more consistency because when he is consistent and he's affecting the game on the offensive end by scoring as well as playmaking, it just opens up the floor even more, and it brings a really big threat that guards and defenses can load up against Marcus Sasser and Jamal Shedd and even Tremont Mark for that matter. It spreads the floor even more. And then I think his versatility is the main thing that Houston really, really benefits off of, not only offensively, but I think defensively. As I was thinking about the game against South Florida, if Jarris was on the floor, he can switch. I know Houston doesn't switch in their pick and roll coverages, but if it's forced to and they hedge and he's forced to switch, he can guard the guard and not only guard him, but he can stop him. And I think something that also bodes well with Jarris defensively, but offensively, I mean, if he can pick up right where he left off of the last 2 games before he missed the South Florida game with the illness, I think that can be the key that unlocks the consistency from a team perspective. Because not only that, I think the team kind of their chemistry is in a good place because they know where he likes the ball. They know where he likes his shots. Not only that, I don't want to say they defer to him, but they realize how big of a piece he is for their success. So they want him to have success. And not only that, I feel like everyone on their teams wants each other to have success because I know collectively it'll help them get to where they want to go.